Thank you, Acting Speaker, and I rise to speak on the Transport Legislation Amendment Bill 2020. This is a bill that has about 58 alterations to the bill, amendments to the bill. I obviously won't be concentrating on all 58, but there are some that I see that are good. Why not? Don't have long enough. But there are some that I have concerns about. So I will begin by making reference to the second reading speech given by the Minister when introducing the bill. And he says that the objective of the bill is to support the delivery of big build projects. And I just would like to start by making reference to that. And there was a report released this week by the Grattan Institute, or last week by the Grattan Institute, which made some comments that I think are worth noting, and that is that governments must rethink their mega projects, those with a price tag topping $1 billion, as they search for infrastructure-led coronavirus recovery or risk delivering a herd of white elephants. So it goes on to note that the Victorian Government's biggest projects, the North East Link, Westgate Tunnel and Metro Tunnel Rail Link, will cost between them at least $11 billion more than originally promised. This is really concerning because when we've got big projects, or we've got a government that can't manage projects without blowing them out, I think, when taxpayers are facing post-pandemic time that we've got to get the state back on our feet, that's most concerning. But the part I wanted to focus on here, relevant to the bill, is that taxpayers would get a bigger bang for their buck if politicians steered clear of what they call nation-building and city-shaping mega projects and instead spent more on upgrading existing infrastructure. Now, in that case, what I think, with 2 weeks to the budget, I hope the government is thinking seriously about the state of our road network in the regions particularly. It's broken. The roads are in a disastrous state, particularly in my electorate of South West Coast. And so I implore the government to take note of those recommendations from that report and invest significantly in the roads. There's probably a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity coming up with the amount of money that the government have made clear they're going to be spending and borrowing to get Victoria back on its feet. There's clear evidence that for jobs in the region, for better outcomes, we need our trucks on roads that are built to the need of the demand of a modern community that needs transport that can get product to market and get kids safely to school and families safely to work and home again. What we've got is an opportunity to do that. And the other thing I implore the government to consider is not only to put a massive injection into our regional roads and the maintenance of those and upgrading of those, but to make sure the processes are in place to ensure the job is done well once and we don't see what we're seeing in the regions, and our community are well aware of, that these roads are breaking down within a matter of weeks to months. So I again implore the government to listen to the community. They're not fooled by the spin doctoring that says, look what we're doing in regional roads. They're driving on them every day. They've had enough. If you're going to put a lot of money into the economy, listen to the Grattan Institute and also the Infrastructure Victoria organisation. They both say it. Get out there, fix the regional roads. It's going to be good for our economy and good for our exporters, and therefore good for the state. I'll now go to the section of the bill that talks about the rail crossings. And, well, this is where I am actually a little concerned, because in the briefing that we received from the government, they actually said that there was no knowledge in the department of how many private rail crossings there are. So in the bill, in clause 7, they want to insert a division B1, 1B after Division 1A of Part 4 of the Rail Management Act 1996 to provide for new powers for the Secretary to close private crossings and acquire land adjoining private crossings where required, and provide for associated compensation processes. Now, in the second reading speech, the Minister says that there are a very few or limited number of private crossings, yet in the briefing what we heard was that there is no knowledge of that, and they will only find that out as they do their due diligence. So these corridors on private land originate from a period when the rail corridor was first created. So he went on to say that the state will also be able to acquire surplus land, and compensation process will include this land. Alternative access may, so it's not a guarantee, also be provided if feasible to do so. This is really concerning when you've got farmers who have these private crossings on their land, and they will be absolutely implicated in any change and not necessarily aware of this. So I'm concerned that in the briefing we were told there was not a comprehensive list, as I said, and where these crossings are, or in fact there really isn't any intent to create a list with that knowledge. So the fact that the Minister is saying in the second reading speech there is a limited number is interesting, and the fact that the member for Eltham said there were 1,700, which is absolutely not what was provided to us in the briefing. They said they didn't know, and there was no intent to find out the assets and make a list. So the Warrnambool line's been earmarked for upgrades, thanks to the funding from the federal government, who are providing 90% of the cost of that project. Although what we see is the Minister for Transport and Infrastructure going out there claiming all the credit for it, which is completely wrong and false. Vast sections of the Warrnambool line beyond Geelong run through private farming land, and I'm concerned that we're going to see an issue like we saw in Warren Ponds, where Stan Larkham, a fifth-generation farmer, had his land compulsorily acquired by the government to build a new train maintenance facility. But this left his farm completely cut in two and unviable. So I'm concerned that because there isn't a list of crossings that farmers in my part of the world are one day going to get a knock on the door and someone saying, we've just realised you've got a private crossing and we're going to take a bit of your farm away because it's not viable to replace it, so you won't be able to access the other side of the railway line, but don't worry, we'll give you some compensation. Compensation won't help the land be viable for farming businesses and will reduce the farm's resale value. You have to actually have access. Much of it is dairy country, and crossing cows across the road twice a day for milking is what they actually need to do. So there's we need a much greater commitment from the government to provide alternative access rather than saying they may do it is viable. And who decides if it's viable, replacing the crossing? That's a big question. Who makes the judgment and what criteria will they use? So we, whilst don't oppose this bill, we will be making sure that we have consultation with farmers and the VFF and get an amendment into the upper house, because I'm greatly concerned for the farming community where this leaves just too much questions. The government must guarantee an alternative access will be provided, and it must release information on how they will decide whether it is viable to replace that crossing. They can't leave it so grey. There's potential for significant issues, and the best way to deal for this is now rather than down the track when you've got 50 farmers whose farms have been cut in half. The other, providing alternate access isn't just an issue for farmland along the Warrnambool line. The South Warrnambool rail crossing in Gillies Street has been closed after an unfortunate accident down there where someone actually took their own life. This was the initial reason given for the closure, but now the government is actually saying they're keeping it closed because they need the land for future train site stabling. So it will stay closed, and no other options have been made available for that area. Now, that crossing connects the Warrnambool CBD to the wonderful trails of Lake Patobe and foreshore area, and is a safe cycling link for those living in South Warrnambool to ride their bikes or walk to the city centre. You just can't take away access and not replace it. Communities down there, the community down there particularly, led by Ray Lockheed, who I've had many chats about this with, have been very vocal in having that crossing reopened, and I support them in that. The government must provide an alternative, not just say that it's closed and find another way. Listen to the locals and do the consultation and open it up with a safe crossing. So I will conclude there. I did say that there were some good aspects of the bill, and one of those is where the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator are able to give their employees authority to enforce Victorian laws, which was an oversight in the transfer of employers from the VicRoads to the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator, and would have meant that the employers didn't have authority to enforce Victorian laws, so that's been fixed. There's the aspect, one of the 58 changes in the bill is about bringing heavy vehicles over the 4.5 tonnage into line with the 00 law rather than 0.05, and anyone who agrees, I think everyone would agree that any improvement into road safety is something we'd all agree to. So I don't oppose the bill, but we will be consulting between here and the upper house and producing some amendments in line with that consultation.